Welcome fans of Fate Grand Order. I am Aevin. You are watching FGO Tips, and as we recover from all of that Valentine's chocolate, I wanted to try something a little bit different this week. I want to explore some of the mythology behind arguably the most popular Lancer in the Fate franchise, Cuchulainn himself. But first, I'm happy to say that this video is sponsored by Amino. Amino is a collection of communities, each centered around a common shared interest. Anything from recipes for baking to tips for workouts, and of course, the Fate Grand Order Amino. This is a great place for quizzes and polls, sharing your favorite fan art, and chatting with your fellow masters about all things Fate. One of my favorite things about it is how much the community does to keep the game interesting, even during the downtime between events. I have enjoyed trying to tackle the new weekly challenge each week. I'm also really excited to say that the community recently surpassed 5,000 members, and we're celebrating with a contest awarding custom titles for the top 3 entries. All you have to do is mix and match mechanics from existing servants to build something fun and new. So come follow me and check out my own entry as an inspiration for your own. It's an alternate version of Cu inspired directly by the story we're covering in this video. And now with that said, let's talk about the death of Cuchulainn. It begins on the road to face a great army. An army summoned by Maeve and comprised of all the enemies Cuchulainn had made throughout his life. On this morning, he happened to pass the campsite of a trio of old crones cooking meat by the side of the road. The women were frail and crippled, each with but one working eye. This sorry sight had not much in life, but they bade him come and eat with them anyway, and knowing he could not refuse, he did so. This was the beginning of the end for Cuchulainn, but to explain why, it's helpful to start earlier, with the story of a boy named Setanta, who was raised by his mother, Dectira. When Setanta was only 7, he learned that the bravest and strongest boys played at combat and sports in the fields surrounding the great fort Emain Macha, where Conovar, the king of Ulster, held court. Dectira, being the sister of Conovar, told Setanta that the next time someone traveled to visit the court, he could go with them. However, Setanta, being impatient and impulsive, immediately set out on the journey himself. By the time he reached his destination, it was almost dark, but he found the older sons of many noble and royal families playing a sport known as hurling, and when the ball came near him, he joined in and drove the ball through the goal. The older boys, not happy to be shown up by a stranger who they assumed to be the son of commoners, picked fights with the young Setanta, but he held his own against each and every one of them until he was discovered by Fergus and brought to meet Conovar. When the king learned who Setanta was, he welcomed him to stay and play more, and Setanta gladly accepted. Some days later, when Setanta was out playing with the boys, Conovar passed by the fields. Seeing Setanta, he invited him to join in a feast being hosted by a great smith by the name of Cuchulainn. Setanta said that he couldn't leave the game now, but he would follow the tracks of the king's chariot that night. By the time night fell, however, the king and his other guests had already arrived at the smith's house. Forgetting about the boy, Conovar told the smith that everyone had arrived, and the smith set his mighty hound free in the yard. This Cu, a mighty old dog, was said to have the strength of 100 and listen to no one but his master. And in the middle of the meal, when they heard the loud cries of the dog, the king suddenly remembered that his sister's young son was to meet him for dinner. He and his other men flew to the yard, and Fergus was the first to find young Setanta, surprisingly unharmed. The king and his men were greatly relieved, but the smith was distraught to find his mighty hound, the one who guarded his home, his goods, and his family, who was like a family member himself, had been slain by the young boy. Setanta reassured the smith that he would make amends though. He would find a young pup and raise it with all the strength and ferocity of the hound he had killed. And in the meantime, he himself would serve as Culainn's loyal dog and stand guard over everything he owned. At this time, Kava, a druid who had been present and witnessed all of the night's events, gave Setanta a new name. With the power to see how the future would unfold, Kava assured the young boy that it was the name of a hero and would one day be on the lips of every man in Ireland. And so was born Cuchulainn, the Hound of Cullen. Throughout his life, Cuchulainn accomplished a great many feats. He trained under Skahak in Dunscaith, the land of shadows, and he was frequently said to be surrounded by a burning hero's light, which twisted and transformed his physical body into a berserker with superhuman strength and power. the very power he used to single-handedly turn back Maeve's army of the Connacht and thwart her invasion of Ulster. But of all the tales surrounding Cuchulainn, it is interesting to note just how many times his relationships with women got him in trouble. Even though it was another Celtic hero, Diarmuid, who suffered hardships because of a love spot on his face that made women fall in love with him, Cuchulainn also found no shortage of romantic admirers and the trouble they brought with them. He fell in love with Emer and eventually married her, but not before storming her father's fortress, killing him, and abducting her. And this love didn't stop him from convincing Aef, the sister of Scahach, to bear his son after he defeated her in combat, a son he would kill himself years later in a misunderstanding. Nor did it stop him from conspiring with an Irish princess from the Isle of Man who was in love with him, conspiring to kill her husband, Cu Chulainn, the king of Munster. There was, however, one woman that Cuchulainn did turn down, though even in this case, it worked out rather poorly for him. For this was Morrigan, the goddess of war and a great shapeshifter, who took the form of many different animals to attack Cuchulainn. First as an eel, forcing him to break her ribs with his feet. Next as a wolf, forcing him to put out one of her eyes with a stone from his sling. And lastly, as a heifer leading a charge of cattle, forcing him to break her leg out from underneath her with another well-aimed stone. Such a string of troubles came back to haunt him though, when Maeve, bent on vengeance, united an army of all the people who had been angered by Cuchulainn over the years. And it was this army Cuchulainn rode out to meet on the day of his death, along with his charioteer, Loig, and his great horse, the Grey of Macha. Like all heroes of Celtic tradition, Cuchulainn was bound by gas not to violate certain taboos. A hero's gas was a blessing because upholding it granted power and strength to a hero, but it was also a curse because to violate the taboo meant to lose that power. Cuchulainn himself had a personal taboo never to partake of the meat of his namesake, of dogs. But an even more important taboo, one which bound all heroes, was to never turn down hospitality when it was offered. And when those old and sorry-looking crones on the side of the road offered to share the only meal they had, an old hound roasting over an open fire, Cuchulainn was unable to refuse. This was no simple twist of fate. This was the revenge of Morrigan, the shapeshifter who had been rejected by Cuchulainn in years past. It was for this reason that she took the form of women missing one eye, with broken ribs or legs. Now, stripped of half of his power for the violation, he still rode into battle, wielding 3 magical spears on the chariot driven by Loig and pulled by the Grey of Macha. For a time, he tore through the men of Maeve's army, but it wasn't long before he stumbled upon another trap. Maeve, knowing that Cuchulainn wielded 3 spears of great power, had placed within the ranks of the army a number of druids. To refuse the request of a druid was forbidden. And so when Cuchulainn came upon the first druid, he could not object when the druid demanded of him a spear. In a rage, Cuchulainn hurled the spear through the man's head, killing him on the spot. But nearby was Lughad, son of Cu Chulainn, the former king of Munster, who had been murdered by Cuchulainn. Eager to avenge his father, Lughad retrieved the magical spear and threw it back. Cuchulainn narrowly dodged this attack, which unfortunately killed his charioteer Loig instead. Now, already weakened by his gas, Cuchulainn began to drive his own chariot and fight at the same time, until he came upon another druid, who demanded of him a second spear. Cuchulainn refused, stating that he was under no obligation to provide the druids a second gift on this day, but this druid threatened to defame the kingdom of Ulster if his request was not met. And so Cuchulainn threw his second spear through the head of this druid, killing him on the spot. Again, Lughad retrieved the spear, and again he tossed it back at Cuchulainn, but this time he missed by the narrowest margin, and instead struck down the mighty Grey of Macha. Without his driver or his horse, Cuchulainn leapt into the battle on foot, where he fought for a time, before encountering a third druid, who demanded of him his final spear, threatening to tell tales that would ensure Cuchulainn's family name would live in infamy if his request was denied. Again, Cuchulainn conceded and killed this third druid on the spot. However, this time, when Lughad retrieved the spear, his aim was true and it struck Cuchulainn in the chest. Mortally wounded, Cuchulainn retreated to the lake nearby for a drink of water. None of the men in Maeve's army were brave enough to follow him, fearing that even in this state he would certainly kill anyone who tried. Cuchulainn lamented over the fate of dying on his back and vowed instead to die on his feet like a true hero. He tied himself to a tall standing stone and clenched his sword tightly in his hand, ready to kill any man who dared approach. For 3 days and 3 nights, Maeve's army watched from a distance, still too terrified of the mighty Cuchulainn to approach. It was only when a raven, Morgan in disguise, landed on Cuchulainn's shoulder that they realized he was truly dead. Lugaid, eager to claim the sword of this fallen hero, found he was unable to pry it even from death's grip. And as he worked to sever the hand of Cuchulainn to remove the blade, it dropped with such force that it removed Lugaid's right hand entirely. One final strike from the hero even after death. The murder of Cuchulainn was avenged in short time by other warriors of Ulster, but the kingdom was never the same as it had been, and in time it began to fade without Ireland's Child of Light. Depending on where you read this story, you'll find slight variations on it, but it consistently comes down to forcing Cuchulainn to break his gas, and then mortally wounding him with his own weapon before he can at last be slain. This reminds me of, and small spoiler alert for Fate Stay Night, don't say I didn't warn you, but I think it says a lot that treachery of this nature is the only way to truly beat him, and that's why I thought his death was incredible. Being ordered by Command Seal to plunge his spear through his own chest, it's so reminiscent of his death the first time around that it must have been even more painful to be betrayed like this again. It's one of those things that I'm not sure if most viewers of the anime know about, but I think it was a really nice touch to do it this way. Anyway, that about wraps it up. I could keep talking about Cuchulainn for days, but I'm pretty sure you'd get sick of it before long. I know it was kind of a new thing, but let me know if you enjoyed this kind of video, and if so, we'll try to do it more often. Maybe another Celtic hero next, or we could venture to another part of the world. Leave your preference in the comments, and don't forget to check out Amino. You can pick up the app for Android or iOS with the link below. Follow me there and let me know what kind of things you'd like to see from me in the future. And don't forget about the contest going on in the Fate Grand Order Amino between now and March 15th. Good luck collecting the last of your chocolates. Good luck with the next singularity looming on the horizon. And as always, thanks for watching.